Next, we have the story at the heart of everything around you. In 1883, a young New Yorker came west to hunt in the Dakota Badlands. Months later, tragedy struck back home. He lost his wife and mother on the very same day, and he returned to this hard, beautiful country to rebuild himself. He ranched, he struggled, he endured, and he left convinced that he never would have become president had it not been for his time in North Dakota. This conversation gathers the leaders who have since guided the state that shaped Roosevelt. They'll what North forged in Roosevelt and what it still offers the country today. Moderating is North Dakota Governor Kelly Armstrong, joined by 4 former governors of North Dakota, Doug Burgum, Jack Dalrymple, John Hoeven, and Ed Schaefer. Please join me in welcoming the governors.
Greetings, everyone, and thank you for being here. Before I introduce the panelists really quick and turn it over to each and every one of them, I would just take a moment to say, I think being the governor in North Dakota is the coolest job in all of politics. And for one brief moment of personal privilege, I can tell you it's not always easy. But it is significantly easier when you get to follow 4 legends who did a fantastic job and really changed the trajectory of this state in a positive way. Sitting to my left is Secretary Doug Burgum. After a successful career in the private sector that landed Microsoft's 2nd largest U.S. campus in Fargo, North Dakota, Doug Burgum served 8 years as governor from 2016 to 2024. President Trump nominated him to be the 55th Secretary of the Interior in November of 2024, and he was confirmed and officially sworn in on February 1st, 2025. Next is Jack Dalrymple. Jack was named Outstanding Young Farmer of the USA in 1983 and helped found the North Dakota Growers Pasta Company. He served 8 terms in the state legislature, including 6 as House Appropriations Chairman, before being elected Lieutenant Governor on the ticket with John Hoeven in 2000. Jack served 6 years as governor from 2010 to 2016. John Hoeven. For more than 3 decades, starting with his time as the president and CEO of the Bank of North Dakota, John Hoeven has been working on behalf of the people of our state. He currently serves as North Dakota's 22nd U.S. Senator, a position he has held since 2011, following his 10 years of service as the state governor. And last but definitely not least, Ed Schaefer. Ed served 8 years as governor from 1992 to 2000 and is the first and only North Dakotan to serve as the U.S. Secretary of Agriculture. Prior to running for office, he worked in the private sector for Gold Seal, the North Dakota-based manufacturing firm founded by his father, Harold Schaefer, serving as company president from 1978 to 1985. And I got his desk in my office. Here's a fun fact. This is not the most governors that have ever been on stage together. 25 years ago, 2 of them were at this event. 25 years ago, 6 governors took the stage together in Bismarck, North Dakota for a panel discussion to mark the 20th anniversary of the North Dakota Heritage Center. So we can say for sure that this is the most governors that have ever been on the stage at the same time in Medora. I told you guys in the green room we really want this to be a conversation. I hope I'll ask the questions, but really I'm really excited to hear you guys riff with each other, because this is just really for everybody in this room, and especially for me, just a real honor to be up here with each and every one of you. But the question 1 is, Theodore Roosevelt arrived in Medora a grieving asthmatic New York assemblyman and left a different man. every one of you has stood on this ground and seen this country in every season. Governor Burgum, let's start with you. What does Western North Dakota do to a person? What did it do to you that no other place can?
Well, thank you, Kelly. Certainly got a story to tell there, but I do want to say I had an experience like you years ago. There was an event where these three governors were there. Jack had just been elected. I was in the private sector and got invited to attend, and Alan Olson was there, so there was 4 governors, and I was asked to be MC, and I was looking around the room, and I said, there was things going on nationally and in other states. I said, well, wow, North Dakota's an amazing place. Look, we got these 4 amazing leaders. We're all here together. I said, if we were in Illinois and we had 4 governors all in one place, we'd be meeting in a prison.
I'd have probably been their lawyer.
That was funny because it was actually true, given what was going on there right now. But it's an honor to be here with these folks. And of course, I look down the line and what Kelly said, absolutely. I got a chance, like Kelly, we're standing on the shoulders of the great performances here. And a special nod to Ed Schaefer, because he was the first guy that broke through as a Republican governor. When he got elected, there weren't any. And now, I could have, if you have this panel 100 years from now, it might be 100 years of Republicans based on what got started. But way to go, Ed. Let's give it up for Ed. Thank you. But Western North Dakota, it's you're growing up in the eastern part of the state, but I was fortunate both my parents were hunters, my mom and my dad, but it was largely bird hunting. They both pheasant hunted, duck hunted. We had, dogs, golden retrievers growing up. So I grew up in a hunting family and from a very young age. But then my dad, who had been served in World War II, came down with a terminal illness, passed away after a long battle for a couple of years when I was a freshman in high school. And I didn't really have a mentor to say, hey, like pick up the baton and let's go, learn about hunting. But I had an older cousin who had kids about my age. He invited me to go deer hunting out in the Badlands. We stayed at a ranch down in Marmarth, and my first time out here then was I was a sophomore in high school, and that was transformational for me. I mean, we'd been through the park when I was in single digits because my grandparents lived in Helen, I had cousins in Billings, and so I'd seen the park, but to actually get on the ground and hunt was something, and that was a love affair that never ended. And I've been, hunting in the Badlands basically every year of my life, all the way up through, I don't post about it when you're in this position, but it was, I did, and often when I was governor, I didn't either, but I did end up getting out here for a couple days last December and was, knocked down a nice mule deer at the last day of the season last year, about 30 miles south of here, and that was fun. Then I had to come up here and check on what was going on over here, and then some of the guys on the construction team were like, who's this dude wearing camo that's walking through here, like like whatever the whole thing. So they're like, I was squeezing in. It was a dual day. I got to shoot a nice mule deer, and I got to come here and watch the progress on the library last December.
That sounds like my favorite day in Western North Dakota. So it sounds perfect. You've each served as governor as one of the most independent-minded states in the country. Governor Hoeven, from your different times in office, what is the part of governing North Dakota that an outsider gets most wrong, and what do you miss most about the job?
I don't know if outsiders get it wrong, but I think they maybe don't realize the full extent of it. But North Dakota is an incredible ag powerhouse. And I wore a tie in honor of that today for all our great farmers and ranchers, right? But we're also an energy powerhouse. And when you tell them that we produce 1.1 million barrels of oil a day, they kind of are agog at that and don't realize that's more than some OPEC countries. They're all excited about Venezuela right now. And Venezuela's producing, less than 300,000. And so I think that's one of the things people don't realize, the impact that North Dakota has on this nation. 40 different major crops were either number one or, one of the top producing states in the country in terms of agriculture and ag diversity. And we're just building on that, and it keeps growing and going, and we're leading the world really in agriculture. And now the same thing in energy. I think we provide electricity to about 10 or 12 different states, and think how important that is now with all the, data centers, AI, and everything else. Look at this place. I mean, Teddy Roosevelt wouldn't be talking to President Trump without all that electricity to power the AI, and a lot of it's provided right here in North Dakota, and oil and gas. And starting certainly with Governor Schaefer and myself and all these governors, we've worked hard to make North Dakota an energy powerhouse. And the people of this state and the companies of the state have done this. It's really incredible. And just like we're at our 250th birthday, we're the strongest nation in the world. I think in terms of we need to keep our shoulder to the wheel for the next 250 years. And so I talk about things like Crack the Code 2.0 and how we're going to continue to build on those strengths, whether it's ag or energy or anything else. I've always said we can compete with anyone, anywhere, anytime, and do very well.
North Dakota produces food, fuel, and the country's hardest working people. Each of you has led this state through a different chapter of its story. Agriculture, oil, technology, conservation. Governor Dalrymple, what is the next chapter, and what is the version of stewardship North Dakotans should expect from whoever follows?
Okay, that's a pretty complicated question, but let me start with an introduction. I gotta tell people that before I became a governor, I was actually a lieutenant governor for quite a long time. So I have this soft spot in my heart for people who don't get recognized. Drew Wrigley, would you stand up? He was my lieutenant governor the entire time.
The actual current lieutenant governor is dead.
And now he's, sunk down to Attorney General, but he's just still doing a fantastic job all the way around. And I'm going to exercise my privilege to introduce my family who has come with me. I don't know where they are, but would you all please stand up and say hello, every single one of you. Come on, you have to stand up. First Lady Betsy. Oh, there's some grandchildren back there. I had to do that, Kelly, because I think of this place, Medora, as the place where people come together, where they meet, where they have a family reunion. And for me, walking in here, having been out of office for almost 10 years now, I'm standing in the hallway, and it's unbelievable the number of people that come up and remember the things that we did for years. What fun is that? And I think this place is about fun. It's about tourism, Ed, thank you. And, people coming together to talk, but just experience this place together. The years that I was governor were really a great ride. And I hit 6 years when North Dakota really surged. Poor Doug Burgum, he came into office after me, and I said, Doug, congratulations. Just so you know, you're starting out with the state pretty much #1 in everything. But I did tell him the importance of sustaining, the position that we have, and he did a pretty darn good job of that, and in many new areas made a great leap forward. Energy, okay, I'll take one out of that long list you gave me. The energy story in North Dakota is so interesting because I remember, I'm so old, I remember when the first energy crisis came along, long ago, and Richard Nixon asked the nation to not turn on any Christmas lights to save power that year. And a few years later, we had another wave of energy crisis, and Jimmy Carter said the answer to the problem is conservation. Just use less electricity this year than you used last year. And I'm thinking, where does this go? And yet for years, that was talked about as a viable approach. Just don't want so much energy. But eventually, people began to realize that that was not the solution. And we started getting calls for energy policy nationally. We we need more energy policy. We don't have an energy policy. And everybody was getting all tensed out about it and who had the best energy policy. Finally, I remember this great quote by Governor Haley Barbour of Mississippi. He said, in his drawl, he said, "I got an energy policy, is more energy." And it was kind of like from then on, everybody started to realize, yeah, we have to develop all our sources. And one of the first guys to coin the term was John Hoven. All of the above. We're not for one kind of energy over another. We need it all. We need a lot of it. And we're not going to even talk favorably about one over the other. And now we finally, John, it's taken a long time, but we've finally reached the point where I feel like we are kind of at that place where people understand it. And the policies that we have are not really policies, it's just an attitude going forward is so valuable. But I got to just tell my little story about oil and gas development because I really hit the surge. And it was wild and woolly, believe me. That was a true oil boom. No fooling around. And I learned about it on a cocktail napkin in the bistro bar one night long ago. And there was a guy there that night by the name of Lauren Copsing, and he drew a picture of the Bakken seam. And he said, "Jack, you got to understand, it's right there. But every time you drill into it, it crumbles and clogs, and you can't get it out." He said, "But we've got the secret." Then he drew a little line underneath the seam, and he said, "This is another layer." And they went up to the University of North Dakota to the core library, and they took a look at the cores, and they realized that they could probably drill into the layer underneath. And then if they did a good enough job of fracking or cracking the seams, the oil in the Bakken would drip down into the other layer. So you see, that moment was actually probably the beginning of the great boom in the nation. No more take spare gas cans with you in the back of your car when you went to Minneapolis. All of a sudden, we go from being a non-contender to being the largest producer of oil and gas in the world. And John Hoven got in on a lot of that fun, but when it got really complicated and difficult, that was when I was around.
We've been out here for 3 days, and this place is just fantastic and a celebration to TR. And TR said that his time in the Badlands made him president. A century and a half later, we are opening the library in the town that helped form him as a person. Governor Schaefer, what does this place, this library, owe North Dakota in return? And what does it have a responsibility to share with the rest of the country?
Thank you, Mr. Governor. Appreciate it. And I, too, would like to introduce family, if I may. I have son Tom somewhere and son Eric over here. I don't see Tom. Well, maybe he hasn't heard me enough. So, we have grandson Trey and great-grandson Jasper here, too, all of whom have Medora running through their veins. So we're glad to be here. Thank you. You know, I was thinking, some of you know the story, in 1952, when I was 6 years old, you can do the math, I stood on the top of the bluff looking over Medora, and my dad said, "There's too much here to be lost." And it wasn't like, "Oh, I'm going to go build this place and do this." It was kind of a melancholy about that independent way of life, the cowboys on the prairie, the honor and work that you get on the prairie, how it shapes the character and individual values of people. And that's what he was kind of concerned with, is disappearing, because this was a place that really had the opportunity to generate those things in other people. You know, Theodore Roosevelt talked often about how life in the Badlands was transformative. That changed, and certainly those of us who had the privilege of living and working here know that to be true. He came to Medora having breathed the air his whole life of wealth and privilege and racial hierarchy and opportunity that other people didn't have, and that's his life, and that's what he grew up with. He came to the Badlands, and here it was where he breathed the air of independence and hard work and challenge and opportunity. And it changed him. It absolutely changed him. I contemplate the mid-century, mid-20th century book, the Negro Traveler's Green Book. It was a publication that said to travelers, these are safe places and good places and welcoming places for Black American travelers. The Rough Riders Hotel in Medora, North Dakota was listed in that book. And I think it was an echo of what Theodore Roosevelt learned here. Here on the prairie, he worked with cowboys and drifters. He hunted with Métis. His neighbors were Lakota and Mandan. He watched women ownership of and operations of ranches and boarding houses and saloons, and he rode with black cowboys and buffalo soldiers. And that helped him discover the human being away from his growth and his pattern. He'd learned the human being, and when he left here, he was
This is a test of the TRPLP system. This is a test.
It's working.
Did I pass? Anyway, the point I'm trying to make here is when he left, when he left Medora, he knew he had in his soul the courage and the honor and the dignity of the individual human being. And that, as he went to ascend to the presidency, he invited Indian chiefs to participate in his inaugural festivities. He invited Booker T. Washington to dine in the White House, the first black man ever to be a guest in the White House. And it wasn't perfect, but it's an example of the shift that took place in him with the way he grew up and what he learned here in the Badlands. And I think that is one of the most important messages that we need to carry from this place. Robbie Loft talks about this Theodore Roosevelt Presidential Library isn't to come to learn about Theodore Roosevelt, it's to learn from Theodore Roosevelt. And I just pray that this library will continue to inspire, to encourage, to lift people up, to learn from the lessons that Theodore Roosevelt learned right here in Medora.
So we have about 20 minutes left. That means there's 4 people up here that get to talk. You each get 5 minutes, and I'm excited about this. And I'm holding you all to it. I've been excited to control time on you guys for a while. Former state party chair, state senator, I have worked with these guys my entire adult political life, and I am significantly better for it. But we're going to do, I think the thing about the library, the thing about what we're celebrating today is there's history behind it. I always tell people that 75% of the people that sit in my chair would make the exact same decision 75% of the time. 85% of the Republican governors would make the exact same decision I make 85% of the time. It's the 15% at the time and place where you had the privilege of serving as governor, where you all get to make your mark and have a life of consequence. And each of you had different times in North Dakota history, different times with the history of the Badlands, with the state, ag, energy, all of that. So, I'm going to work from where we are today all the way back to the beginning. So what is your favorite part about your time as governor, and what did you appreciate the most that you brought to that office at the period of time in which you were doing it, Governor Burgum? You guys have to brag about yourself a little bit because you're all awesome.
That would take longer than 20 minutes to cover all the things we did. But I am going to use part of my 5 minutes to say that I got my friend Jack here, who's from Castleton. Arthur's 15 miles away. I grew up. They have billboards. They have Governor's Park. They have 5 governors from Castleton. I mean, it is like on and on and on about. It's like, if you're from Castleton, it's like you wake up and then just, I'm going to be the governor someday. It's like that's going to happen.
Don't get any ideas.
So people said, why'd you run for governor? It's like, because everybody in Arthur said, we want to have a sign by our town that says we have at least one governor on Highway 18. So it's been, but Jack and Betsy have been amazing to Catherine and I. Catherine, the First Lady, is here, did a fabulous job when she was governor. We were so honored to serve as the 33rd governor and First Lady of North Dakota. It was really special. I would say that one thing that did come during that time in office, including some of the people that are in the room, Jay Spieler, Robbie Loff, we had a number of folks were there when this idea of how do we take the idea of a Theodore Roosevelt Presidential Library and how do we upscale it? And I think that there is a lesson there for all of North Dakota, because there will be a book written not about TR, there'll be a book written about how the library came to be. And this whole thing was like TR. It was bold, it was audacious, it was impossible. It was like the idea of, at the time when we started, we didn't have an architect, we didn't have land, which we needed an act of Congress to get these 93 acres. We didn't have a budget. We didn't have anything, but we had one thing going. We had a release date, which was July 4th, 2026. We knew that we wanted to have a library open on that day, and here we are. We also knew that we had an opportunity to not just look in the past, but have a place where people could come and be inspired about how they could play a role in citizenship, leadership, in conservation, how they could be in the arena, not be a critic on the side, but how they could make a difference. And it was meant to be interactive. And we said, how can we make this a place where, I think Ed O'Keefe was the first one to say it, we want a place where people will bring their kids, and the kids and grandkids will drag their parents and grandparents, as opposed to parents, dragging their kids to a presidential library. Most presidential libraries is a lot of objects under glass. We've got some spectacular objects here that help tell that story, historic kind of Mona Lisa quality things that we had to pry out of the hands of the federal government, which got easier, by the way. I got a lot of no's when I was governor, but I got in a new role and people started saying yes. It was weird when you're asking the Park Service to give up valuable objects.
I have the opposite experience. People told me no all the time as a congressman. It's a lot easier as governor.
But here we are. But I would say to this day, as we celebrate the opening, I mean, for everybody here, it's to say this is a milestone. It's not a finish line. It's a starting line. And the starting line for North Dakota and all the supporters and all the donors that are here. I mean, we have an opportunity to build a lasting cultural institution. This is all private sector dollars that have gone into this thing. We had a great challenge grant from the state of North Dakota. That money still sits at the state land board, which Kelly oversees right now. It still sits there. So everything you see here, every salary that was paid, every construction bill was paid by the private sector. This was a big dream, and people said it couldn't be done, and they said it couldn't be done at a scale that was 1/30th the size that we ended up with the vision. So sometimes for North Dakota, we have to believe in ourselves. We have to believe, like Theodore Roosevelt did, that we can do big things, that we can build great institutions, that we can drive the policy for the nation on ag, on energy. We're literally doing it right now. This administration is following the path laid that North Dakota showed on how we could become the highest GDP state with some of the lowest taxes, smartest regulations, cleanest air, cleanest water, best soil health. We were doing it all right here. There aren't false trade-offs. You can be a country that has energy abundance and has low energy prices and takes care of the environment. It's not a trade-off. We can do all of that. We're doing it here in North Dakota and doing it because of the gentleman on the stage helped pave the way to make that happen. And everybody on the stage and everybody in this audience had a hand in helping this institution come to life. But remember, let's celebrate this incredible beginning, this incredible milestone, but let's all recommit ourselves to how great we can make this and how we can continue to increase the impact of North Dakota on the nation and the world.
And I'm going to say this because I think it doesn't get said enough. And this place as it exists and what we are in today doesn't happen without Governor Burgum. Jack, you said earlier, just about 10 years out of public office. When you look back, what do you miss? What are you the most proud of? Like, what do you remember the most fondly about your time and the job of being governor of this great state?
Sure. Just before I dive into that, though, one little follow-up on how this place, came to be. And it is absolutely magnificent, but it's also miraculous. And if somebody from out of North Dakota says, how'd you do that? I would need a lot of time to explain it. But you start with...
You got 4 minutes.
You start with the Governor Schaefer, who was, his family was like, the definition of tourism in North Dakota. He creates a place that at least a lot of people are aware of, and people can see the potential of it. Governor Hoeven comes along and says, yeah, we ought to do that, and let's start working on that, and maybe can we get some federal land, or maybe could we get some big donors, or, how can we put this together? And then I, kind of followed along and said, yeah, great idea, let's see what we can do. But one day, Doug Burgum, before you were governor, stood up and stuck his neck out and said, this presidential library idea is going to happen. And everybody was kind of, yeah, right, chuckling and making little comments as they can do in the halls of the legislature. But, all of a sudden, I'm saying to people, you don't know Doug Burgum that well, do you? And I said, I know him pretty well. And this guy creates software companies out of thin air and stuff like that. And I said, when Doug Burgum tells you he's going to achieve something, you better not bet against him. And that's what I said then, and you made me right. You made me right. Thank you. And thank you from all of us for what you did. Oh, okay, my time in the office, I look back and I'm proudest of the way that I understood bipartisanship and working for solutions to problems with more than just one party. And I had an advantage there. I was a legislator for 16 years. My wife, Betsy, actually agreed to come to Bismarck with me when we were very young. We put our children in the Bismarck public school system. Didn't hurt them a bit. And we actually had a great time with it. But I became the chairman of the Appropriations Committee. In the Schaefer years, there was a very simple thing. Ed proposed no spending, and then I followed through with his proposal. And we were actually very proud at the end of the day to say that we had not allowed taxes to go up or spending to increase. And, these days, it's pretty tough to do that. But we were able to do that.
It's tough to do that, too.
And Ed deserves good credit for that. But then when John came along, I was sort of the accidental lieutenant governor. I went to the convention, and I actually supported Gary Nelson, my neighbor at Castleton. You got to give me credit for not wanting to bury that, though, Could have just done away with that. But there was a need for a running mate at that convention, and it was getting late on a Sunday morning, and there was a lot of people had the opportunity, but nobody was dumb enough to go for it. And finally, I turned to Betsy and I said, "Oh, what the heck? What else we got to do?" And she said, "Yeah, why not?" And that was the real decision right there. And becoming the lieutenant governor with Governor Hoeven was probably the best bet I ever made in my life. I thought I saw success ahead with him, and he turned out to be a great executive branch individual. And so here I am, 16 years in the legislature, looking at the governor's office as nothing but the enemy. And then suddenly I'm in the governor's office, and I've got to talk to legislators like Kelly about what ought to happen. And everybody, really does not understand that there's a tremendous advantage in having a relationship and knowing the people that are involved. And so if I wanted to talk to somebody about joining us and solving a problem, they would talk to me. And that was a real advantage. Since then, I've been asked to go places and speak on bipartisanship. But what's happened is really a tragedy, and is probably, as the last panel pointed out, Kevin Cramer, Senator Cramer included, maybe the biggest problem facing our nation right now. So that was the highlight for me. We were able to do a lot of things on a bipartisan basis.
I'm just letting the timer up top know I'm taking a minute back. Thank you. Governor Hoeven, as somebody who's in D.C. now, and I'm sure misses North Dakota every day, what do you remember most? What are you most excited about?
Well, first off, serving as governor, any elective office is an incredible honor, and you appreciate the great people in North Dakota for giving all of us that opportunity. But I think you could ask every one of the governors, and we've all been in different roles as well, whether it's in the Senate or secretary, but hands down, the best possible job is being governor. And I ask all of the senators who were former governors, and they say the same thing. And a lot of it is being able to set the agenda, to create initiatives, and then follow through. And I think that's one of the biggest and best things about it, which I'm going to touch on, but I also want to touch on that I've had the opportunity, and still have the opportunity, to have worked or am still working with every one of these individuals on stage in so many capacities. I was president of the Bank of North Dakota, of course, when you were chairman of the Bank of North Dakota, and as Jack said, he was in the legislature, and it was always fun as president of the Bank of North Dakota to go talk to the legislators and hear what they said about the governor, and then go talk to the governor and hear what they said about the legislators. With Dorso and Nelson and those, it was fun. And they didn't pull any punches either way. But that's the beauty of our government, the checks and the balances. And we had Vanderwall at the Supreme Court, and I really got to see right there that we have great people in government, and they work hard and they serve the people of North Dakota very well. And of course, then working with Doug, I actually was at the Bank of North Dakota, and I was asking about a loan that we had on the books to a company called Great Plains Software. And I said, "Oh, what's that?" What Wells Fargo was the lead, and then we're the participating bank, and so when thing tanks, we're the ones that get it in the neck. That's kind of it works with Bank of North Dakota. And we had this great thing. They said, it's all right. If it goes down, we got this great thing as collateral. I said, "Oh, what's that? Is that farmland or what kind of?" It's software. Software. And I'm going, what the hell is that? So we go over to Fargo, and we go into this it was like a shopping center area that he was renting, and he's sitting in his office, and people are putting these floppy disks in little boxes, and they're packing those little boxes in cartons. And he's explaining software to me, and on, and of course, fine. And we walk out of there, and I said, if this thing goes down, we're screwed.
It didn't.
But it kind, as you know, it kind of worked out. And with Kelly, he was chair of the party, worked with him in Congress now. As every one of these guys, working with him is such a great experience. And so as I worked on initiatives, both as governor, you know, when I started as governor, we were producing less than 100,000 barrels a day, and there wasn't one drop coming out of shale. And you're right, guys like Lauren Kopsinger were saying, oh, it's there, it's there. And I'd heard a lot from Lauren, so I'm thinking, well, maybe it's there, you know? But he was dead right. And whether it was that or all the amazing things, advancements in agriculture, or how about making Grand Forks the drone capital of the world? You know, how's that show? I mean, pretty good show? Well, we are the drone and counter-drone capital of the world, and it's an overnight success. We only started 20 years ago in 2005, but that's how it works, hard work. And these guys work hard. They're great people, great families, and they all recognize that it takes a team. It takes a team to get things done. And the things we started working on as governor, we're still working on today, and we're making them bigger and better. Look at all the things that Ed Schaefer did and his whole family from Medora, and now look at what Doug Burgum is doing. It's crazy. And we all got a little piece of it, passing the law to get, that was my bill, along with my great partner, Mr. Kramer right here in the front row. Senator Kramer was a co-sponsor in the bill. But all those things, those initiatives are so fantastic because we're working for the greatest people anywhere in the world, the people of North Dakota.
Us as Republicans, I think we take for granted Republican and conservative leadership in North Dakota. That wasn't always the case. 1992, very different state, very different political makeup. Along comes a guy named Ed Schaefer. Changes the trajectory of how leadership is done in this state. You kind of started it all for each and every one of us. What do you remember the most fondly? What are you the most proud of? You got extra time.
I'll try to give a short answer, but you know, there are many things. One, I think when we started, obviously, the state was in a pretty tough condition. The economics were awful. Energy and agriculture, our top two performers, were both in the tank. Government was cutting back. We didn't have enough money to pay our bills. Things were pretty bad, and the state had been run that way for 40 years. And it was a difficult time. And so we came in and said, we want to change. You know, we want to look at a new way to do it. And a lot of it was people were in the doldrums. People were tired. Their kids were leaving the state. They didn't have jobs, careers. Things were, you know, just kind of really disruptive in people's lives. And we came in and said, our campaign was Schaefer Means Business. And that meant a lot of different things to a lot of different people. But one of the things it meant is, you know, if we want to generate North Dakotans' future, it's not government that's going to drive the economy, it's business that's going to drive the economy. And we need to move government out of the way and get opportunities for business investment, for jobs, for careers, for our kids and our families, and make that work. And so it was fun because we didn't have any money. And Jack was talking about the fact, well, you know, we just said no spending. But what we were able to do is we were able to generate that economy through business investment by lowering taxes, by removing regulations, and the economy started to go. At the same time, we cut the cost of government, lowered the cost of government for the first time in North Dakota. So we had a lesser cost government. We put more money into education and safety and health of our people, and we drove that economy going forward. And we're still enjoying the results of that today. One of the opportunities and examples I give, because we're talking about energy, is, you know, in 1997, we came in and said, let's do a 2-year tax holiday on a horizontal well that's drilled in a vertical dry well. So you didn't have to have a new pad, you didn't have to do utilities, you were able to go in and do it. And, you know, that start, people was like, oh, that's pretty interesting, economic incentive. And lowering the taxes caused leasing, equipment to move, opportunities, and we said, oh my gosh, this is gonna go. And that is an example of many things we did to spur the economy. And I'm most proud of that. The second piece is when I was campaigning the first time, a farmer from Zeeland, North Dakota, started poking me in the chest, literally. And he said, you know, I'm a Democrat and you're a Republican, and I think you're going to win. But he said, I want you to know, when you get there, you're going to represent me too. And you know, that led the opportunity to, the first tenet in our office was to serve all the people all the time. And we were able to really bring North Dakota out of the doldrums and into a fun, exciting, happy, moving forward place, because we put people in the equation, not government. And I think that's a lesson from Theodore Roosevelt. He came out here, he interacted with the people, he learned, that's what we did in the governor's office. We interacted with the people. Kevin was out there all the time, you know, trying to gin up people, and we're going, we don't have any money, but we're going to cut spending, and by the way, we're cutting taxes, and people supported it because they had belief and hope in the future, and I think we generated that. The most important thing for me personally, 8 years after being in office, our scheduler, who's the toughest job in the administration, their scheduler came in and said, I worked for 4 different governors. You're the only one who's the same person coming in as you were leaving. And that was a win.
That's a great answer. Thank you all. Thank you all for joining us up here today. But most importantly, thank you what you each and every one of you have done for the state of North Dakota. And you all have a special part of history of what we all believe is the greatest state and the greatest country in the history of the world. So thank you all very, very much.
Our America 250 coast-to-coast coverage continues as we take you live to a celebration at Mount Rushmore with
is supported by Comcast, NBC Universal.
The C-SPAN networks, delivering round-the-clock, uninterrupted coverage of the nation's 250th birthday, bringing the most comprehensive view of this once-in-a-lifetime celebration with festivals, parades, and fireworks displays.
I'm Ted Clark, and I'm the founder of Hubtown Tours, currently the executive director. And I started this little business just about 10 years ago. We're right here in Boston, and this is very much a Boston-based business because Boston is at the vanguard of the American Revolution. There is no question where the war began, and what our little business focuses on is the years that came before the war. So the political arguments, the debates, the controversies, the protests, the American Revolution, in the words of John Adams, it's not what happened during the war, it's what came before, the 15 years prior to the outbreak of war at Lexington and Concord. So our little business, the way we separate ourselves is we first offer small groups, but we also do a chronological narrative along what's known as the Freedom Trail here in Boston. And we try to bring that little town of Boston back to life for folks. The landmarks, there are a number of them, and they serve as a backdrop to the stories that we tell. This is the Massachusetts State House, and of course the iconic gold dome topped with a lovely pine cone. And that beautiful gold dome is actually the namesake of Hubtown. Boston's nickname as the Hub actually comes from a quote, Oliver Wendell Holmes Sr., a Bostonian making fun of his fellow Bostonians for our self-centeredness. Quote, Boston State House is the hub of the solar system, and that is an idea you cannot pry out of the mind of a Bostonian, even if you had a tire iron straightened out the length of creation.
And we're here with Will Stillwell, one of the tour guides for Hubtown Tours, formerly with the National Park Service. Will, where are we headed today?
We're standing here on Boston Common, often listed as the oldest public park in America and Boston's gathering point for over 400 years. The Common is a 48-acre green space in the center of an urban town of Boston this makes it by nature the spot for Bostonians and others to gather over the course of its history here. It's a place that even to this day is a place where you're going to find meetings and speeches and protests and concerts, and that's something that's been going on for hundreds of years, not just in the Revolutionary era, but right on to the present day. Beyond that as well, I think it's important to acknowledge, while this has been set aside, this 48 acres for, just for about 400 years as this public green space, archaeological work has been conducted on Boston Common over the past 50 years, in which they've uncovered artifacts dating back over 10,000 years old. So really, that is when we're talking about our timeline. I think it's important, too, as we're thinking about 250 years, that that's only one small part of a long history. There's thousands of years of history here, from the indigenous people, their ancestors, the Massachusetts people, where Massachusetts gets its name, onto the English arrival in 1630, to the Revolutionary era of the 1760s. This is a long timeline. Thousands of years people have stood where we're standing. That's a point of connection over thousands of years. Living in Boston during the Revolutionary period, the 1760s, the 1770s, you would have felt like you were living in a tight-knit but large community. This is a town of over 15,000 people, a bustling one with, shops, businesses, coffee houses, taverns, but also a very stratified society, meaning that people tended to not really step out of their social group, their social classes. The rich and the middle and the poor tend to keep to their distinct groups, socializing with each other. There's taverns that would be for specific social classes, coffee houses to certain social classes. You're not going to find the ship owners and the sailors in the same tavern, for example. And one of the interesting things about the American Revolution in Boston is how these distinct groups, separated socially and economically, are going to be coming together to form a broad coalition. These social groups really wouldn't socialize outside of their own types here. But an interesting thing about the lead up to the American Revolution is how these distinct and separate social classes are going to come together and unite to form a broad coalition against the power of Parliament, which will ultimately lead to the Declaration of Independence and the independence of the United States. All right, so we're walking now into the Granary Burying Ground. This is the third oldest of Boston's Freedom Trail burying grounds. It dates to 1660. We call it the Granary because the Old Town Granary once stood next door where the Park Street Church is located now. This is what we call a burying ground because it is not a graveyard, it is not a cemetery, it is unconsecrated space belonging to the town of Boston. It is not church-owned, it is not holy, because the Puritans who established this in 1660 did not believe in praying for their dead. They didn't hold funerals, and they didn't bury their dead in special sacred space because they believed that God selected every single person who will ever go to heaven at the beginning of time, and you can't get on that list unless you were born on it. This is also why visitors, millions of them who walk this burying ground every year, they're often struck by the symbols on the headstones: skulls, hourglasses, and scythes. These are reminders to the living that death is permanent and inevitable. It isn't a way to memorialize the dead. But the reason that millions of people visit this burying ground every single year is because there are famous burials associated with the American Revolution here. We're stepping right now up to the tomb of Samuel Adams. Buried beneath where we're standing here, one of the most important figures of the American Revolution in Boston. Samuel Adams was known in his life not for his business. In fact, despite some modern connection, he did not make beer. His father made malt, a business that he inherited and which he promptly ran into the ground. What he found was true passion was in politics, involving himself in Boston's town meeting, writing political articles and synthesis, and really his great skill is going to be taking together the general anger of people in Boston over their different situations in life and giving them a political argument. They should be angry that Parliament, by passing taxes, overstepping local government, is taking away a foundational right to the people of Boston as Englishmen. The grave almost exactly next to Samuel Adams is that of the 5 victims of the 1770 Boston Massacre. They represent a completely separate social class from someone like Adams. Adams being a gentleman who would meet the requirements and eligibility of voting in Boston. The 5 victims of the Boston Massacre are the lowest end of Boston society. These are laborers, these are apprentices, and they are sailors. In fact, the most famous of the 5 victims was a sailor, Crispus Attucks, the first man to die the night of the massacre. He was actually born into slavery in Framingham, Massachusetts in the 1720s. He escaped as a young man and lived the rest of his life free, working independently as a sailor at the time of his death, based out of the Bahamas. This is the tomb of John Hancock, likely the wealthiest man in Boston at the time of the American Revolution, a wealth that he inherited but was not born into. His father was not extremely wealthy, but after his father's death, when John was only 7, he was sent to live with his wealthy but childless aunt and uncle, Lydia and Thomas Hancock of Boston. Thomas Hancock was an extremely successful Boston merchant, meaning his business was in transatlantic trade, and he raised John not just to be his son, but to be the heir to his business. Thomas sends John on to Harvard College. He sends John to London to learn business, and when Thomas Hancock died in 1764, he left his entire estate to his nephew John, immediately becoming one of the wealthiest and most prominent men in town. Pretty much immediately, John Hancock tried to run for election in Boston, now being a prominent gentleman of town, but the entire political structure of Boston was in flux due to Parliament passing the sugar and stamp taxes, taxing the colonies directly for the first time, a move that was very unpopular among those local to Boston. But those of the most powerful positions in town were finding themselves having to defend these unpopular policies. This will lead John Hancock to the mentorship of Samuel Adams, requiring the political credibility of someone like Adams to aid his quest at acquiring political power. For someone like Adams, this is a mutually beneficial relationship because Hancock had a lot of money. His deep pockets would later help fund the American Revolution. And while his tomb, this marker is not at all original, it dates to 1898, it does fit the wealth and status and stature of a man like Hancock, as does his famous signature, the largest and most prominent on the Declaration of Independence, though he signed first and largest because he was the president of the Continental Congress and he signed everything big. The king was never going to receive that copy. It was not signed largest, so the king could read it without his spectacles. Next to John Hancock's tomb is a grave that, on the one hand, is easy to overlook, but also draws a lot of attention here in the burying ground. This is a grave that reads Frank, servant to John Hancock, Esquire, who died 1771 at the age of 8. Now, there's a lot of questions almost built into this headstone. How could Frank be a servant and yet only be 8 years old? Where is Frank's last name? Where are Frank's parents' names? And the answer is deceptively simple. Frank was not a servant. Servant in this context is a euphemism. It's a way of saying without saying the truth, which is that Frank was likely African and enslaved by John Hancock. We've been talking about how life in colonial Boston would have been a place, a bustling town of 15,000 people. Well, between 12 and 1,500 of those people were in bondage. These are enslaved men, women, and children, primarily African, enslaved by the wealthy and affluent of Boston, like John Hancock. This headstone is extremely rare. In fact, it may be the only one in Boston specifically to an enslaved person. And there's been a lot of discussion around it among people who visit this burying ground. What I found in my research and in hearing what people talked about in town here was that a lot of people were telling stories in the burying ground about Frank teaching John Hancock to ride a horse or being his mentor when he was a young person. And it was all built around the fact that no one seemed to know how old Frank was. And sources, traditional ones, had different ages listed. So I, as the research manager of Hubtown Tours, took it upon myself to find the answer. I swept the earth away from the bottom of this headstone, revealing Frank's age to be 8 and proving, at the very least, that those stories people were telling were not true and that Frank's story is a deep tragedy. A little boy enslaved by a powerful man, and his headstone, even though it is memorializing him, it's also dehumanizing him. What I encourage visitors here to do is to look at Frank's grave and acknowledge something simple, which is that he was a human being who lived, not just a little enslaved boy who died, an acknowledgement that would not have really been made by the powerful people in his life while he lived. The Granary Burying Ground has every type of person who lived in 18th century Boston, all different social classes from the top to the bottom, men, women, children, indigenous people, Africans, Native Americans, and we've covered some of the wealthy and some of the poor, but we need to talk about the middle. And there's no person that better represents the middle social structure of Boston than Paul Revere, the silversmith and goldsmith of Boston. He worked in a trade. He worked with his hands. He would have called himself but a simple mechanic, meaning he worked with his hands. And he was not, by definition, a gentleman. He was of the middle rank of Boston social society here, but he was eligible to vote at Boston town meeting. And as Boston is suffering from economic depression, aided and increased by Parliament's taxation on sugar and paper, someone like Paul Revere is feeling the effects of those taxes more than others in town because, unlike the wealthier gentlemen of town, he has thinner margins. He has mouths to feed, his children, his wife Sarah, his second wife Rachel, his mother Deborah, for example, here, who are buried all in this burying ground. This is going to inspire Revere to involve himself politically, etching copper prints of political cartoons and drawings. He's going to offer up his services as an express rider, going from place to place. And the reason he was the perfect person to do that is that he was known to be quick on horseback while also being honest and trustworthy, meaning he was known to be able to get somewhere fast, and when he got there, people would listen to him. It's why he makes the famous midnight ride of April 18th, 1775, but that was not the only time he'd ridden on horseback delivering an important message. He did it a number of times over the course of 73, 74, and 75. The idea for the Freedom Trail really came about in 1951 when a columnist for the Boston Herald Tribune had visited the Old North Church, and in talking with the church's caretaker or sexton, he was told that visitors were trying to find the Old North Church and they were having trouble locating it, especially people visiting from out of town who weren't used to Boston streets, or people, honestly, who weren't even used to navigating a city generally. And he proposed in his column that there should be some way of connecting together these separate historic sites and have some kind of catchy name around it. He proposed a couple of ideas: the Puritan's Path, the Liberty Loop. Eventually, they avoided the alliteration and settled upon the Freedom Trail, and eventually came upon the idea of connecting these sites with a physical red brick line through the streets of downtown Boston. And this really answers one of the biggest questions visitors have when they're visiting Boston. They're trying to find these historic landmarks. They're getting lost. I used to work for the National Park Service, where visitors would come to our visitor center, often, many of them, having never really set foot in a city before. Where do I go? How do I get there? Having a red brick line to follow, just walk the line, would make it so much easier and give people a great introduction into the city of Boston, kind of allowing them to feel comfortable walking around town like they know where they're going, almost like they're local. And that's one of the things that attracts, again, millions of people to walk the Freedom Trail every single year. It's ease of use, it's ease of access. And that was the goal back in the 50s on to the present day. They've worked really hard, those in the city, to maintain it and keep it to be easy and understandable, even for people, again, who don't have a lot of experience walking around in more urban areas. December 16th, 1773, 4,000 people crammed into the Old South Meeting House here behind me, probably hundreds more out into the streets. At the end of this meeting, which had been gathered to discuss the tea ships anchored in Boston Harbor in the wake of the passing of Parliament's Tea Act, it was almost a foregone conclusion before this meeting began that those ships were not going back to London and drastic action needed to be taken. At the end of this meeting, probably 150 individuals streamed out of Old South with 2,000 more following behind to go and watch as those 150 boarded the ships in Boston Harbor to crack open the chests of tea, dump them overboard into Boston Harbor in an event that will later become known as the Boston Tea Party. That famous event of American history is really born out of the Old South Meeting House right behind me here. The Old South Meeting House was built in 1729. At the time of the American Revolution, it was one of about a dozen congregational meeting houses throughout Boston. And as a congregational meeting house, it would have been used for religious services on Sundays, but then also could be used for any type of public meeting. You know, most towns in New England in the 18th century would have one public building that would be used for government, for school, and for church. Boston was large enough to have a dedicated meeting space for its town meeting, Faneuil Hall, but Faneuil Hall was only built to hold about 1,200 people. More than enough for any general town meeting, but if you wanted to have a larger indoor meeting, you'd have to come here to the South Meeting House. While they would never do this today, they would put over 4,000 people inside of Old South, which they did on multiple occasions in the 1770s. You can see that we have the downstairs pews. As we look up, we can actually see 2 levels of gallery here as well, allowing for even more space to fill up. We talked outside how the meeting here of 4,000 people would have led to the Boston Tea Party. I think it's also important to mention when those tea ships were anchored in Boston Harbor, it wasn't just tea on those ships. That's all that was destroyed. One of the other items was actually a shipment of books published by Boston poet Phyllis Wheatley. Phyllis Wheatley was actually a member of this congregation, but she wouldn't have sat down in the pews we're in right now. She would have sat upstairs on the 3rd floor gallery because she was enslaved by Mrs. John and Susanna Wheatley. It was really rare to have works published and written by an enslaved woman. She was really the first African-American poet. And her name would have borne with her her status as an enslaved woman. She was enslaved by the Wheatleys, and the Phyllis was the slave ship that took her across from Senegambia to Boston when she was only 7 years old. Her works, though, would be widely published all across the British Empire. She would have met George Washington after writing a poem for him, and later had an audience with King George III, though she didn't end up actually meeting him. Today, she's probably the most famous congregant associated with the South Meeting House. Thousands of visitors come here every single year to visit this historic space, though it's worth mentioning, not only is the space no longer used for church services, it also does not have the original furnishings, because once the British Army occupied Boston in 1774, they actually destroyed the interior pews and used this space as a riding school for their cavalry. So we just left the Old South Meeting House. We're now walking over to our next stop, the Old State House. And the original conceit of the Freedom Trail was to connect together these 16 landmarks that were all managed separately. Not only are they separate landmarks, but had separate, owners, separate jurisdictions. In 2020, the proprietors of the Old South Meeting House and the owners of the Old State House merged into a singular organization, bringing together 2 distinct Freedom Trail sites under one ownership, which is called Revolutionary Spaces, sort of a nod to the connections to both buildings to the American Revolution, and allowing visitors to come buy one ticket and see 2 sites in a more unified manner. This is the center point of colonial Boston, both economically politically, and often socially. We're standing at the end of modern Washington Street, which would have been one road in and out of colonial Boston. We're looking down toward Long Wharf, the main entryway to Boston by sea, and right at the intersection of land and sea in Boston is the main government building for the entire colony of Massachusetts, what was known originally as the Town House, built in 1713. It's where you would find the royal governor, his office, as well as the meeting point for the elected legislature of Massachusetts. This would remain the government building for the colony of Massachusetts until the American Revolution, and then it became our state house. It continued to be our Capitol building even after the Declaration of Independence until we built the current state house in 1798, meaning that in Massachusetts, we've been in 2 state capitol buildings in just over 310 years. October 1st, 1768, 1,200 soldiers of the King's Army marched right by where we're standing to occupy the town of Boston. They would be here for 17 long months, occupying the town, impossible to miss in their bright red coats, in a direct violation of the British Bill of Rights. It would be relatively peaceful over that 17 months with just sort of minor street fights and arguments between locals and soldiers, but things would truly escalate to violence on March 5th, 1770. Now, the night before, a foot of snow had dropped onto town. All day and all night had been walked over. It's a thin layer of ice on March 5th. Standing guard outside of the Custom House across the street from where we stand was Private Hugh White of the Army. As he's standing guard, he notices 2 young apprentices walking by, shouting insults at one of the officers of the Army. Private White goes over to them and demands they show respect to an officer. They show the same amount of respect to him. They start insulting him. He takes the butt of his musket and just hits one of the kids right in the forehead. He was assuming, I think, that would shut the kid up. Instead, he screamed. He fell to the ground. He started to wail and cry, and this drew in the attention of the other people walking around that night, mostly young apprentices. They soon crowd Private White in front of the Custom House. He soon has a crowd of probably 10 to 20 in front of him, shouting insults at him. As the crowd grows, when they see attention coming into here, they start picking up snowballs and ice balls and rocks and oyster shells, trying to hit Private White from afar. This draws the attention of the other soldiers. Captain Thomas Preston of the guardhouse across the square will gather 7 privates. They'll push through the crowd, their bayonets out, and that draws in more attention. The crowd is going to grow to 30, to 40, to 50, to 60. Preston organizes the men into a semicircle in front of the Custom House. He tells the men to load their muskets, but not to fire, because if they fire, that's a criminal action. The crowd knows this because they're yelling at the soldiers, "Fire, you cowards! You damn you lobsters! You bloody backs! Why won't you fire?" At this point, the bells and sounds start to ring. People think something is on fire. They're stepping outside with buckets of water in hand, but they don't find flames. They find this crowd of maybe 100, mostly men on the lowest ranks of society, laborers, sailors, apprentices, enslaved and free men of color gathered into this crowd. In this crowd, of those apprentices are Samuel Maverick and Christopher Monk. In this crowd of those laborers are Patrick Carr and Samuel Gray. And of those sailors, James Caldwell and Crispus Attucks. As one of the soldiers, Private Edward Montgomery, is knocked back, his gun goes off over the crowd. Seconds go by. Preston is trying to block his men. He's standing between them, but they don't hear the order. They don't know what to do. One by one, led by Matthew Kilroy, fire, 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 fire. Attucks, Caldwell, and Gray were all killed instantly. Maverick was shot in the back. He died the next morning in his own bed with his mother at his side. Patrick Carr, shot to the abdomen, hip to hip, lingered for a week, and then he died. Christopher Monk, shot in the back. He lived, but he never walked again, and he wouldn't live to see 30, and his family would blame his early death on the shooting. 5 or 6 other people wounded, bullet wounds in the arms and the legs and the backs as the crowd scatters and then comes right back, banging on the doors of the State House and the guardhouse, demanding justice. From the balcony of the old State House will step out Lieutenant Governor Thomas Hutchinson, begging the crowd to go home, telling them that he will live and die by the law. The law says these men will face trial for murder, but later it can only happen when the crowd goes home. They disperse. In the coming days, the Army and Navy are fully removed from Boston. And soon, as this information of this event hits the newsstands across the empire, it will come to be known as the Bloody Boston Massacre. This is the council chamber here at the Old State House. This is where the royal governor would sort of address his council and make his decisions. This is really probably the most important room in the building, at least of the ones that are extant today, since the building has been so heavily modified since its original 18th century appearance. You have to imagine royal governors Bernard and Hutchinson and General Gage sitting in this room deliberating, but probably the most interesting piece in this room is the view out the window onto the balcony. This is where the royal governor would stand and look down and address the people. Above him, he's flanked by the symbol of England, the gold lion, and the symbol of Scotland, the silver unicorn. And those pieces that are up there today are actually replicas. The originals were torn down and burned in a bonfire in 1776, and that same year, on July 18th, from this very balcony, the Declaration of Independence was read for the first time in Boston. On top of Boston's Faneuil Hall is the iconic grasshopper weather vane made by Shem Drown of Boston, capping off Faneuil Hall since 1742, modeled after a similar weather vane that sits on top the Royal Exchange Building in London, meant to draw a connection commercially between Boston and London. Faneuil Hall would have been the center of Boston commerce in the 18th century. This building was paid for by Boston's slave trader and merchant Peter Faneuil, and it bears his name to this day. The lower floor is the commercial space, the market floor, meant to be that center of Boston's market, and then the upper floor would have been Boston's town hall and town meeting space, where some of the many gatherings leading up to the American Revolution would have been held. This building remained Boston's town hall until 1822, when Boston became a city, and it remains a city-owned meeting space to this day. The centerpiece of Faneuil Hall here is the Great Hall. We're up on the second floor of Faneuil Hall, and this is the room where town meeting would have been held prior to 1822. This is where Samuel Adams would have stood up to speak out against the Sugar Act and the Stamp Act. It's where the bodies of James Caldwell and Crispus Attucks were brought after they died the night of the Boston Massacre, and this really was the center of political life in Boston for the town itself. Now, with that being said, this room is very different now than it would have been in the colonial era, because in 1806, the whole building was actually doubled in width and height. So this building is significantly bigger, this room is significantly larger, but where I'm standing right now, this is actually the original side, this is the original portion. There is original brickwork on the outside of this building. And the city continued to use this space even after they stopped doing town meeting here in 1822. This is where you would have had great speeches by people like Frederick Douglass on the subject of the abolition of slavery, speeches from Lucy Stone on the idea of the right to vote for women. And this continues on to the present day. The city hosted in 2013 Barack Obama to talk about the Affordable Care Act. This room is where Boston naturalizes its U.S. citizens, meaning that new citizens of Massachusetts, of the United States, get to sit in this room and enter in that tradition, going back all the way past Obama, past Mitt Romney, and onto Lucy Stone and Frederick Douglass and Samuel Adams. It's a rich history. There's no better spot, in my opinion, for that to be done than the Great Hall of Faneuil Hall. We're now leaving downtown to the final part of our tour, where we were walking through Boston's historic North End. This is a residential neighborhood known for its crooked and narrow streets and 19th and 20th century tenement-style buildings. It has the character of an early 20th century Italian-American enclave today, but it is Boston's oldest neighborhoods, or rather one of them. It's where you can find the home of Paul Revere and the iconic Old North Church, which are our last two Freedom Trail stops today. (1770), February of that year, Paul Revere, his wife Sarah, and their 5 children, as well as Revere's mother, Deborah Hitchborn Revere, moved in together to a home here in North Square behind me. This wooden house that they were moving into was already 90 years old. when they moved in 1770. This house was built in 1680. The oldest house in downtown Boston, the second oldest property in the whole city of Boston, one of only two remaining 17th century structures. A reminder and a remarker of what it was like to live in the North End in the 18th century, coupled with the brick structure next door, built in 1711, and for many years, Paul Revere's first cousin, Nathaniel Hitchborn, lived there. So these two homes, the Paul Revere house and the Hitchborn house together, are a way of picturing the neighborhood in the 18th century, as well as showing that family connection between the two houses here. Paul Revere did not run his business out of this home. He would have had a separate shop where he ran his gold and silver business here, but that was his primary occupation, his primary income. He's going to become involved politically over the course of the 1770s, allowing himself to sort of print out images onto paper etched in copper. He's going to be making express rides. For example, after 150 Bostonians destroy 340 chests of East India Company tea in December of 1773, an event known as the Boston Tea Party, leaders in New York found out that happened before the newsstands got to them because Paul Revere hand-delivered that news to them in only 5 days on horseback. And this is again due to the fact that he was known to be quick on horseback and also honest and trustworthy. This is the Prado, the Paul Revere Mall. Behind me is the statue, equestrian statue of Paul Revere, and behind him, the steeple of the iconic Old North Church. On the night of April 18th, 1775, 700 British soldiers made their way from Boston, rowing boats across the Charles River to Cambridge on their march out west to Lexington and then on to Concord. In a pre-set up move here, the Committee of Safety of Boston, led by Dr. Joseph Warren, had planned to have 2 riders on horseback go out ahead of the British Army the moment they saw them leave town. The 2 riders trusted with this, one a local tanner named William Dawes, and the other the silversmith Paul Revere. Revere, recognizing the flaw in a plan of having only 2 riders against 4,500 soldiers and a curfew in place at night, set up a backup plan, having a lookouts looking in Charlestown for a signal from the steeple of the Old North Church. 1 lantern in the steeple if the army made their way down the Boston Neck, the long way to Concord, or 2 lanterns in the steeple if they were rowing boats across the Charles River as a shortcut, which is the way they ended up going. In the words of Henry Wadsworth Longfellow, 1 if by land and 2 if by sea. We don't know who went up with the lanterns that night because Revere never identified them by name, but what we know is on that night of April 18th, the soldiers were spotted rowing across to Charlestown. William Dawes was dispatched and rode out of town. Paul Revere went to his friend, told that friend 2 lanterns, and they would have gone up 8 stories of stairs and ladders to the top window of Old North, lit the 2 lanterns out the window towards Charlestown for no more than 60 seconds before blowing them out and getting out of there as quickly as possible. When Revere himself made it to Charlestown later that night, the militia there confirmed they had seen the signal. They already had a rider out ahead of Revere. Revere would mount a horse he borrowed from them, riding west to Lexington, discreetly knocking on the doors of trusted individuals along the way to inform them that the regulars, the army, had left Boston. They then went and got the local militia ready. These would be the militia fighting in the following morning, April 19th, 1775, the Battle of Lexington and Concord, the first engagement of the American Revolution. This is the Old North Church, the oldest standing church building in the city of Boston. It was built in 1723 and is still actively used for worship today. Its official name is actually Christ Church in the city of Boston, founded as an Anglican congregation. Today, it's Episcopalian. This pew that we're in right now is actually decorated in the manner that pews would have been decorated in the 18th century. The majority of Old North's box pews are plain and white, reflecting a more modern taste for the congregation, but originally each one of these pews would have been individually owned and decorated to the taste and means of the owners. This pew is one that's left open to resemble how pews would have been set up originally in the 18th century. The church, while it does not maintain its original paint style, it has the white look of the colonial revival of the 20th century, they have, over this past year, actually restored original paint features. You can see these beautiful angels in the archways. That's actually original 1723, 1724 paint that has been painstakingly restored by scraping away layers of decades and decades of paint. A brand new look for the thousands of visitors that come here to Old North every single year. And it was here on the night of April 18th, 1775, that Paul Revere's friend, whoever they were, would have come in through the front door. They would have climbed up the back stairs. They would have squeezed behind that pipe organ and climbed up those 8 stories of stairs and ladders to the top window to light the 2 lanterns, one if by land and 2 if by sea, in the words of Henry Wadsworth Longfellow. Here we are at Cops Hill Terrace. This is the final stop of our tour here today, and where our Hubtown tours, Freedom Trail tours end. We're actually looking over the river at the end of the Freedom Trail. The last 2 stops are just beyond us here. You've got USS Constitution, the oldest commissioned warship afloat in the world, anchored permanently across the harbor from us here. She's famous for engaging with British warships during the War of 1812. She's undefeated in battle, and through all her victories over British warships, she earned the nickname Old Ironsides, because it was said that cannonballs would bounce off her oak hull as if she were made of iron. Behind her is the tall obelisk, the Bunker Hill Monument, 1843. It's when it was completed. This monument was actually had ground broken in 1824. It would take years for it to be completed. It took a lot of money that was not there in order to build it. It is marking the location of the Battle of Bunker Hill, but it does not mark the location of the hill, Bunker Hill. The hill that the battle was fought on and where that monument is actually named Breed's Hill. Where's Bunker Hill? It's another hill that's further back behind. At some point, the 2 names got mixed up and swapped permanently, so now the Battle of Bunker Hill was fought upon Breed's Hill. And the Battle of Bunker Hill, which was the first major pitched battle of the American Revolution, in one sense is the beginning of the story of the Revolutionary War, but for the story of revolutionary Boston, it represents the end. That battle, though it was a British victory, would maintain the siege of Boston by the Continental Army, which would end in March of 1776 when the British Army would evacuate from pressure from George Washington, the Continental Army at Dorchester Heights, south of Boston. And with the evacuation of the British troops in March of 76, the Revolutionary War never returns here, which means that even though it goes on for 7 long years after 1776, for Boston, the story ends here. The story ends there. 1776 really represents the end of that chapter that started all the way back in 1763 with the end of the French and Indian War, and is an ideal place for us to end our story here today.
C-SPAN's America 250 coverage is supported by YouTube.
Celebrate the 250th anniversary of America's founding this Independence Day weekend with special America 250 programming on C-SPAN 2. Historians from the Museum of the American Revolution lead a walking tour of Philadelphia's historic site, and Pulitzer Prize-winning author Rick Atkinson explores the parallels between America's founding generation and the World War II generation. Reenactors bring history to life with recreations of the 1773 Boston Tea Party and the 1775 Battle of Bunker Hill. And then on Sunday, author Richard Brookhiser discusses Revolutionary War hero the Marquis de Lafayette, and reenactors imagine a conversation between George Washington and Benjamin Franklin about the American experiment. Celebrate America 250 all Independence Day weekend with special programming on C-SPAN 2.
Discover the heartbeat of democracy with C-SPAN Voices as we meet people from across the country along the National Mall in Washington, D.C., preparing to celebrate America's 250th anniversary. We're asking, what does America's 250th anniversary mean to you?
Hi, I'm Danny Villanueva. I'm from Baltimore, Maryland, and the 250th anniversary of our country, our great country, means a lot to me. My parents were first-generation immigrants who settled in Baltimore, and although I'm telling my age, I was here for the 200th at Fort McHenry, so this is really exciting.
My name is Patty. I'm from California, and this 250 means a lot. I was graduating from high school in the Centennial and helped paint a dam that said 1776 to 1976, and now here we are, right? 250 years later. No matter what happens, we always seem to come together. That's what I love about this country.
Teresa, Yuan, we are very proud and honored to be a part of the 250th anniversary because it's once in a lifetime, or 2 millennials and a half. So we're just very proud to be a part of this and being able to share all the cultures, all the states, all in one go without actually having to travel, whether it's car driving or aircraft, and everyone is able to appreciate each other's states and all the cultures and the backgrounds that it comes with.
C-SPAN Voices, delivering democracy unfiltered. Be a part of the conversation. C-SPAN's nationwide coverage of events celebrating America's 250th birthday continues. Next to Philadelphia, where Pope Leo XIV gave a speech broadcast from Vatican City after receiving the prestigious Liberty Medal. The honor recognizes his advocacy for religious liberty and human dignity.
Welcome to the 2026 Liberty Medal ceremony in honor of our recipient, His Holiness Pope Leo XIV. We are honored to welcome members of the Religious Leaders Council convened by Interfaith Philadelphia, representing more than 30 faith traditions across the greater Philadelphia region. Their presence reflects the spirit of mutual respect, religious liberty, and common purpose that we celebrate today. Please welcome our distinguished guests. Senior Rabbi at the Congregation Rodef Shalom, Rabbi Jill L. Maderer. Founder, President, and CEO of Esperanza, the Reverend Luis A. Cortez, Jr. Director of the Mayor's Office of Muslim Engagement, Imam Kaiser D. Abdullah, PhD. Pastor at Mother Bethel AME Church, the Reverend Carolyn C. Cavanis.